The longer your endurance event, the more important fueling becomes.
Yep, and today we're going to be explaining why that is the case and how to best fuel for your next ultra adventure.
When it comes to ultra endurance events, one of the keys to success is how you fuel, how much you can eat and drink, and importantly, how well you absorb and use that energy on the go.
Yeah, and your body can only store a limited amount of glycogen in your muscles and liver. For most people, this is limited to around 90 minutes, and even in highly trained athletes, this can be maybe around 2 hours worth of fuel as glycogen. By contrast, you can store many hours worth of fuel as fat.
Yeah, now if your goal is only to go as far as possible, you can just go slowly and mostly use fat, and you'll be able to go pretty far. But if you want to go as far as possible and as fast as possible, you need to rely on carbohydrates and fat. In fact, even if you are highly fat adapted and your body is really good at using fat as a fuel and you only need a very little bit of carbohydrate to top that up, when your brain gets to the point where it feels like your reserves are getting critical, it will actually slow you right down or even stop you before it gets to the point where it feels like your body might be in danger of running out of energy entirely.
It follows then that to go far in an ultra as fast as possible, you need to do 3 things. 1, train your glycogen reserves to be as large as possible. Number 2, you want to train your body to use fat as fuel as efficiently as possible. And number 3, you want to teach your body to absorb and use ingested fuels as effectively as possible.
Yeah, today we are focusing on the third one. Over a good training program and many miles, your body will naturally learn to do the first 2. It will naturally increase your glycogen stores and learn to use fat as a fuel. But how you eat, what you eat, and when you eat can make a huge difference to the outcome of your next ultra endurance event.
Yeah, and well, the principles and lessons that we're going to be discussing today are mostly focused around running and triathlon, and mostly because they are the hardest to get right due to the higher heart rate, jarring impacts, and also the difficulty of transporting these fuels when running. But all of these principles apply to all ultra long endurance events.
We're going to start long before the event begins. Whilst training and preparing for your event, you should also train and prepare for your nutrition. This means deciding what you're going to use on race day and then practicing it many times and in many conditions during training.
Yeah, too often people do weeks and months of brilliant training, and then only in the final couple of weeks, or in fact days, they'll start to think about what they're going to fuel with and how they're going to carry it. Now, we're not suggesting you go out and entirely simulate your race, but maybe in some of those longer training days, you can start thinking about and trialing what you're going to eat before and during, and that way you know in plenty of time what has worked, what hasn't, and any issues you might have.
Yeah, in the final 48 hours before your event, you need to pay careful attention to what you eat and drink. You can either set yourself up for success or you can set yourself up for failure. Now, in the good old days, they believed in carbo loading, eating copious amounts of carbs such as pasta in the days leading up to really fill up your stores. And they would go so far as to starve themselves of carbs for a few days and then eat copious amounts of carbs to really supercompensate their stores.
Yeah, whereas today we know that if you're adequately trained and eating well, then you'll be keeping your glycogen stores at their max. And just a couple of days of rest, they'll be full. So carbo loading is kind of unnecessary. That said, don't go avoiding a carb-rich diet in the lead up to the event. I mean, carbohydrates are really easily digested and leave very little waste, and I mean, kind of what your body runs on. So don't go avoiding them altogether. Make sure you maintain a nice balanced diet right up until the event. Just maybe avoid some of those more problematic meals like curries or a big steak.
Yeah. And then to race morning itself, you want to wake up and have a decent breakfast to top up your reserves from that night's sleep. And this is something that a lot of people struggle with, especially when race morning is an early start and there's a lot of nerves, but it is important. You want to aim for around 1,000 calories at least 2 hours before the race start, and it needs to be easily absorbed and low fiber fuel. If you just can't eat, this can be in the form of a shake or a smoothie 2 hours before your start. And then just before your race starts, you want to have something small and easily digested, like a bar or an energy gel, just so that your body knows that there's some fuel in its system right from the start.
For the event itself, the first piece of advice is to have a plan. Having a nutrition plan which targets how much to eat and when is vital to prevent mistakes. Your race day nutrition will almost certainly not go to plan, but even if it doesn't, knowing how far off you are, the ideal helps you react in the moment. Now, your plan should include a target number of calories or grams of carbs per hour, where that will come from, also liquid consumption per hour, and electrolyte consumption per hour.
Yeah, and ideally you would have all of these fairly separate so that if you have to reduce one, you don't also lose the other. For example, if you have to reduce your amount of calories because your stomach just can't take it, you don't want to have it in the same bottle as your water and your electrolytes, because then you won't be getting enough calories, but you also won't be getting enough fluid, and you also won't be getting enough electrolytes. Your calories target needs to be based on how much you can absorb per hour. You'll be burning roughly 700 to 1,000 calories an hour, and you cannot replace all of that. For highly trained athletes, they can take up to 360 calories an hour or 90 grams of carbs. For most people, they can train themselves to take in about 65 grams or 270 calories an hour. We'd suggest in your training, when you're testing this, you start at around 50 grams or 200 calories an hour and then play with adding more.
You can get this from gels, chews, energy bars, or energy drink, which can have as much as 120 calories per bottle. You can also take some of this as proteins, and even some as fat if your event is really a long, slow grind.
Fats and proteins can help you feel more satiated and satisfy that hunger that develops after a few hours of endurance activity. But just be aware that at all but the lowest heart rate, your body's going to find it really hard to digest and absorb fats and proteins. So you do need to get most of your calories from carbs.
Yeah, and once you've planned this, you can then calculate how you're going to carry this fuel or food, or where you can get those calories on course. You can then think about hydration. This is even more individual. Some people sweat heavily and others hardly at all. You may be a light sweater and only need 500 milliliters an hour, or a heavy sweater and need 2,000 milliliters or more an hour. You can figure this out with careful pre and post-workout measurements of body weight. The weight you lost is water loss and will be fairly similar in similar conditions. It will also, of course, change with increases in the ambient temperature.
And finally, how many electrolytes you need to replace. This is a bit harder to know, but there are ways. Our friends at Precision Fuel and Hydration have a fancy tester which can tell you exactly how much salt you lose in your sweat. Or you can estimate it using their handy website tool.
And once you have all of this, you can actually start to plan how you're going to carry it all. Obviously, this all depends on the sport and the event you're doing, because for an ultra event, you're probably going to want to use a hydration vest or pack. That's going to allow you to carry all the hydration and, of course, all the fuel with that. For a cycling event, you're maybe going to use a combination of pockets on you and also bottles on the frame. But for some longer triathlon events or ultra long cycling events, you may want to start looking to things like storage bags on the frame or bento boxes and the all-important aid stations.
That's right. Now, as we have said, in long course racing, nutrition plans seldom actually go to plan. So you need to build in some contingencies. Pack some extra calories just in case, and also pack in some different flavors and tastes. It's amazing what the body craves in the later hours of an ultra endurance event.
Yeah, with that, prepare to be flexible. If you haven't been able to eat or drink as you had planned, it doesn't mean that your ultra event is over. Find what you can use, whether that's an aid station or digging into your reserves, and try and get that total calorie intake back on track as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and before we go, one more note on caffeine. Now, most people use caffeine just to get through their normal day, never mind an ultra endurance event. So it is a useful tool when it comes to ultras. But you need to be careful how you use it. Too much caffeine can lead to GI distress, and if you think about taking in maybe 200 milligrams an hour in an ultra endurance event, caffeine takes a long time to clear your system. So over a few hours, that can build up to crazy levels in your system, enough to cause jitters and palpitations and all other kinds of weird things.
I've been there.
Yeah, so rather save that caffeine for later in your event and use the caffeine according to your own tolerance for caffeine.
Yeah, well, thanks ever so much for tuning in today. I hope today's video has helped you towards your next ultra event. If you have got an ultra event planned and you're entered for one, let us know what it is in the comment section down below. And if you have recently done one or have done one in the past, let us know how it went and how you fueled for it yourself. As I say, hope you've enjoyed today's video. If so, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe.